Our today's topic is media literacy in times of war and recession. It's a very hard, but yet very important topic that needs to be addressed. My guests today are Stefan Vladisavljev, Program Coordinator of Foundation BFPE for a Responsible Society, Igor Novaković, PhD, Research Director, International and Security Affairs Center, Zsolt Rabai, Vice President of International Center of Development and Transition and expert on security politics, and Andrei Tiut from GlobalFocus Center. Welcome and thank you for talking about this topic. So I would like to start with a question for Zsolt. Is it now easier than ever to fall under the influence of fake news and disinformation in times that are hard as this one that we're in?
Hello to everybody. Thank you very much for this question. I think it's really an important question today because what we can witness, there is an increased activity on behalf of different actors of the international scene, and we can witness a lot of Russian fake news, for example, especially now in the context of the war in Ukraine and the crisis, the economic crisis, financial crisis, the energy crisis in Europe. And obviously, when we are in a crisis situation, that provokes a lot of emotions on behalf of people. Once we have emotions, we are really very open to absorb emotional news, even if those news are not realistic or they are absolutely fake and leading somewhere totally out of the real world. So yes, in a crisis situation, we are more ready to absorb and accept fake news. But on the other hand, also the actors who are involved into this crisis, they are issuing a lot of news. And as I mentioned, now, for example, from behalf of Russia, we can witness very important activities. And we have to talk, when there is a crisis, about resilience to a crisis. And when we are talking about resilience, I think that part of it is a public support to your government, public support to your political system, a public support to the values that your political system is representing, the credibility of your infrastructures, the credibility of your government and institutions. So now what we can see today in this crisis period, that, for example, the Russian fake news are definitely attacking at on all those fields. So they are trying to raise fake news, provoking more polarization of the society, and also discredit your governments or discredit your institutions. Like, for example, recently there were out some fake news that the Polish government intends to evacuate Poland because they are afraid of the spread of the war and so on and so forth. Obviously, when the population believes this news, that would be a panic inside the society. Obviously, if the government tends to evacuate, then or intends to evacuate, then it means that for simple people that will be a very complicated situation, and maybe we don't see everything. The government sees it, the government knows. So I would say, indeed, media literacy and resisting or being able to identify fake news in a crisis period is extremely important because there is an increased activity.
Igor, Zsolt spoke about polarization. So, and we spoke before about, that East versus West polarization. That one is very present in Serbia. It's very strong, maybe now even stronger than ever. Can we see and can we discuss how it can go from here now on, where it could lead us?
Well, to be honest, I'm not a believer in apocalyptic scenarios, at least if we are talking about Serbia. Yes, the situation is dire because we have polarization that is fueled actually by the fake news, by the disinformation, primarily coming from Russia, and to an extent, there is, meddling of the domestic political elite simply because of their own political gains. So in that sense, the situation is quite challenging. But I would say, and if we observe how the media picture and everything, the opinion here is shaped, actually 30 to 40% of people, those people who go to the elections and who are the most active ones, are actually the ones who are in general following the pro-governmental line. So if there is a certain change in the discourse of the government, and we can see that actually. So for example, every now and then there are bits and pieces of information that are, showing actually in perspective that not all of the standpoints of the Russian Federation are in line with Serbia's interests, and I believe that this could increase. For example, few days ago in Tirana, after this, joint declaration, which was co-sponsored by the EU and the Western Balkan states, President Vučić, president of Serbia, he said actually, when explaining why Serbia is not introducing sanctions to Russia, he said that we will not behave like Russia behaved towards us in 1992. And this is extremely important because it shows to you that actually there is a comparison between our situation before and now Russia. But he said that we do not believe in sanctions, etc., as a tool of behavior. What I'm trying to say is that if the government and the ruling elite changes the standpoint, then we will have actually a sort of move from the current position towards more stable one and probably more pro-Western one. The real danger there in terms of polarization is that Russia, of course, did not remain idle. Unlike in Western and Central Europe, they are not investing that much in the media, in mainstream websites and organizations, but still they have founded and established a completely separate line of communication, with their let's call them sympathizers or sympathetic citizens to their cause through other means of communication. So, and I'm referring to, for example, Facebook, so social networks, Facebook, then Twitter, of course. But then since recently we have Telegram as the main channel of communication, plus some gray zone websites that are not actually in the line what is coming with what is coming from the pro-governmental publics. What I'm trying to say is that actually, with this increased activities regarding direct informing of certain groups of people here in Serbia, Russia has a potential actually to create a bit more instability and to contribute and to furthermore contribute to the polarization. But I think that the key aspect of everything is how actually the government will react in the coming months. Will Serbia remain in this, how to put it, neutral position, although it's quite challenging to claim that is neutral, or it will move forward more in line with our own interests, because we are the country that is completely surrounded by the EU and NATO, and our own security in that sense relies. I mean, we are totally dependent on both of these organizations and their member states.
Thank you. Stefan, when talking about East versus West, East is not just the Russia. There is also China that is very influential in Serbia in some manners. Can we, as you being the expert on the topic, can you speak a bit more about China's influence in the area?
Well, thank you, Anya, and thank you for raising this question, this point. And it is, you know, a natural continuation of what Igor was speaking about, but there is a certain specifics when it comes to the Chinese presence and influence, especially in the media sphere, but also in how it is presented in general narratives. And I think that the key point and key word here, it is actually narratives. Because when we are talking about China, we cannot look only at the Serbian case, because Serbian case is just part of the template that China is using across the world. So basically what I'm referring to presentation of China as someone who provides development, as someone who is there not to, you know, push any kind of values on the countries that China is cooperating with. No, we will not, you know, make you to go through a democratization process. We don't want to affect your rule of law standards and nothing else. We just want to help you to develop your economy, to develop your infrastructure, to save jobs. And I would say that this is the narrative that has been quite successfully adopted by the Serbian decision makers and Serbian ruling political elite. And if we are talking about the media sphere and how the media sphere is actually presenting these narratives, there are two parts of it. The first part can be described as direct influence coming from China and by the Chinese media outlets, but it is very limited. There is a limited number of the Chinese media presence in Serbia. It is not really that visible. It is basically a provider of content that can be taken by the other media outlets, domestic media outlets, but even then, those kind of articles and those kind of publications are really not that, you know, accepted on the national level or among general public. But the second one, and where we come to the also building the resilience, and the second one and the most important one is actually promotion coming by the domestic actors. First and foremost, the decision makers led by Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić, but then facilitated by the other relevant political elite members, ministers, or prominent political figures from the Serbian Progressive Party, but also other parties close to the Chinese Communist parties. And that is actually an interesting case because we see promotion of the Chinese project, but we see them as a hidden promotion because it is first and foremost the promotion of economic, let's call it, successes by the domestic actors. And then there is, you know, add-on that it is facilitated by the Chinese. But even so, even that was not, even that did not make China a domestic, you know, household name. What it did was facilitated actually the Chinese role, and what was heavily boosted by media was actually COVID-19 crisis and the role of the China in the providing assistance to Serbia in the fight against COVID-19 crisis. During the COVID-19 crisis period, China became recognized name. Everyone knew who Xi Jinping is. You could go across the streets and you will find the ordinary people talking about China. And again, and I will finish with this all goes in line with the overall narratives launched by the Chinese Communist Party from Beijing to the global level. It is facilitated by the domestic actors and basically recepted by the domestic public. And if we are talking about resilience, what is the utmost need? It is to have capacities to recognize what those narratives actually are, who is placing them in the front of the public eye, and who is promoting them basically as something that is beneficial, successful, whatever you want to call it, although there are, of course, other sides of it. I will stop here, and I will be more than happy to continue conversation in the second.
Yeah, we can continue further. I would like to talk to Zsolt about one specific issue. We spoke a year ago about something similar. So I asked you about the difference between Russian and Chinese communication and their approach to news. Of course, in the previous year, Russia has been dominant with the war happening and everything. But can you analyze now the means of communication and the way they communicate? And has China taken seat back or what is happening right now?
Yes, it's always very interesting to compare China and Russia. But I think that we should definitely not make the mistake to confund them. So they are not the same countries. They are not sharing everywhere the same interest. It is one thing that in certain cases, they might have common interest, but to a certain extent. Now, for example, China doesn't really like, for example, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, not only because China is always extremely careful and saying, no, 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 we don't want any foreign intervention into the affairs of other countries, but also because in Ukraine there were a lot of Chinese, especially in the agriculture, but Chinese economic interests that was lost practically with the Russian invasion. On the other hand, they don't want to alienate Russia, and especially because they are in big competition with the United States. Russia is fighting United States and Western Europe. So obviously, in a sense, China and Russia are allies, and China can now buy much cheaper and with good conditions Russian energy. So what I wanted to say that, yes, we used to talk about Russia and China. They are not the same, and we should not confound them. And also in communication, we can realize that the Russians are much more aggressive. Practically, they are running an information war, a psychological operation towards Western Europe and the United States, but first of all, Western Europe. And now when I'm talking about Western Europe, so I'm also talking about the central part of Europe where Serbia belongs to as well. This is nothing really new. This already existed in the Soviet area. Those are the same techniques, but it is now in a totally different information environment. And what we could see in the past few years, and especially in the last year, that Russia became extremely aggressive and active on internet, on social media, also faking well-recognized Western media outlets' websites, and citing them and referring to them as credible information sources. So they are using also professional and amateur journalism and media outlets, and they are financing extreme right political parties and extreme right political party professionals and leaders, which is already very sensitive, because obviously extreme right parties, especially today in a very polarized Western European society, they have a lot of followers and they have credibility. So if they confirm Russian fake, that sounds very credible for a lot of people in the Western European societies. Now, when I'm talking about the Chinese, they are very active in communicating towards United States and Western Europe as well. But somehow their message is different, and they are a little bit more gentle, using a lot of allies among our academics, and developing an agenda which is mainly advertising the Chinese, let's say, a special way of development, the Chinese way of socialism. And what is their main message? That, look, I mean, there might be on the world different civilization. The Chinese civilization is different than the Western civilization. Don't come with human rights and those issues. This is very much a Western issue, but we have our own issues, and we are developing a kind of harmonious society, and we don't want to put in danger anybody. Obviously, the facts, the political facts, and what China is doing in the South China Sea and toward its neighbors, and also inside the country, that doesn't really show always a very harmony in the society. But this is the main message of China. Now, Russia is trying to undermine the credibility of the Western governments and institutions, tries to undermine the tries to spread fear sometimes, or panic in the population. Is one hand in hand with, of course, the officials' declarations when they said, okay, we are at the threshold of a nuclear war. Obviously, that was shocking Western society. Even here in Belgium, when I saw people in the neighborhood also already looking at opportunities where to hide if there is some major Russian attack, maybe against Belgium or Belgian airports, and so on and so forth. They are trying to provoke and increase the polarization in the society. So practically, this is a psychological warfare and information warfare on behalf of Russia. And that's different from what the Chinese are doing, who are very active. They are trying to spread their messages, but much less, how to say, confrontative than the Russian communication efforts. But they are using almost the same methods, also with all the media and buying media and buying influencers. Just the message and the goal is.
Thank you. Hello, Andrei.
Hello.
Thank you for joining. Since the topic here is media literacy in times of war and recession, somehow you being the living in a neighboring country of Ukraine, the war is somehow the closest to you. Can you tell us what has changed in the previous year and what is the situation right now with information, disinformation, and everything?
Hello, everybody. First of all, thank you. I'm a bit late to this. I had a blackout, which was not caused by Russia, but nevertheless, it was a power blackout. So we had to adapt. Now to your question, I think that the best way to understand this is to compare two consecutive crises, which are the COVID crisis and the war crisis. With the COVID, the situation in Romania was really bad. Was very much science itself was discredited. So there was a lot of unnecessary death, in my opinion, and the graphics show that if you look at the data. And with the war crisis, things were significantly better. There are problems in the information sphere, but nevertheless, there are two things that were a source of resilience. One is that the population in Romania distrusts and fears to a great extent Russia and Russian imperialism. And I believe at some point there was about 3 months ago, I think, there was a poll saying that 60% of the population were at least somewhat concerned with a possible invasion, which really shows that there is this fear and this distrust. And on the other hand, it was something that happened right after the invasion, after the start again of the war, when lots of refugees suddenly came and the authorities were not necessarily fully prepared for this scenario. And there was a rush to the border from Romanian NGOs and churches and just simple people to help the refugees. And I believe that they set the tone. And partly because of that, there is support for what the Romanian state does and for what the European Union does in support of Ukraine.
Thank you. Igor, I have a question for you that while Stefan was speaking about the Chinese president being very well known in Serbia, and he even had his billboard like president of Russia also. Does it seem to you that somehow we, as Serbia and people here, that we are more eager to connect with countries that have some strong leaders, some countries are known for the values they share, and some are known for their leaders. And somehow we navigate towards those with the strong leaders, and even when I say strong, you know what I mean. And even we as a country choose and keep those strong leaders for a very long time. It has happened in the past, it is happening right now. Do you think that makes us like easier to manipulate? To be manipulated?
To be honest, yes. I think that we as a nation and in general in discourse, we are always looking for this type of strong leader that can curb and solve all of the issues. And actually, to an extent, I think it's also a transfer of responsibility. So you are not looking to have functioning institutions, but you are putting all of your hopes into some strong personality that can solve issues. And also, when you have a person like that in power, this person is also looking, I mean, they're much more happy, or they are much more eager to establish communication and with the similar type of leadership than to have a concrete communication structured around the institutions with other countries. And in particular, this is visible in our region. I mean, I would not go that far as and Putin and Xi, because these two personalities are more used for domestic propaganda here in Serbia than I think that our leaders are comfortable with communication with them. When I say the region, it was quite visible that our leadership had quite a good relationship and good communication with Viktor Orban, for example, then Nikola Gruevski, former Prime Minister of Macedonia, then with Edi Rama from Albania, and to an extent, I mean, it's not like that in the past few years, but at least until before 2017, 2018, it was the case with Milo Đukanović. So we have this type of situation, but also what this type of rule within the country is creating is actually a sort of you can call it problematic information surroundings in the country. What I'm trying to say is actually that what we are having in Serbia is actually information surroundings and the situation in the media, which is really good for enhancing vulnerabilities in the wider society, and this actually allows foreign actors, in particular Russia, to more easily penetrate our national discourse and to send these messages around that are not verifiable, that are problematic, and that are enhancing vulnerabilities and actually decreasing resilience of the whole society.
Thank you, Stefan. I presume there is something that you would probably want to continue to Igor's speech, and I would like to hear from you also. What can we expect moving forward when it comes to China's investments in Serbia in times of recession? What are the benefits that it's going to have, and what are the negative sides, if any?
Well, yeah, thank you for that. One thing that I would maybe like to add on, maybe to expand on what Igor has already mentioned. Often we see the popularity of actors like Putin or Xi Jinping or countries like Russia or China come with a caveat. And that caveat is actually that there is a certain portion, not significant, but certain portion of population that is pro-Russian or pro-Chinese because they're anti-Western. So there is a strong presence of anti-Western narratives among Serbian population, especially having in mind the history and the recent developments with the NATO intervention in 1999, and then the feeling that there is a West behind, Kosovo's independence and everything surrounding that case. So if you're contesting, you know, USA or general Western liberal narrative, there is a chance that you will go as a popular actor among a certain portion of the Serbian population. And then it can be expanded with all of the other things that Igor has already referred to. But I believe that this is something that, again, is something that has been paradoxically not developed immediately after, for example, NATO intervention or Kosovo independence, but because we had a certain level of disappointment, for example, in the European integration process, or certain feeling that the US is still trying to be a global policeman. So over the years that the anti-Western sentiment has built upon, now we have political parties trying to exploit it, and finally we have that creation of image of Russia or China as alternatives to the West, which can, you know, be discussed extensively. But having in mind what is ahead, I had a chance to look at the Serbian budget, for example, for 2023, and projected debt of Serbia, so the official numbers towards China, for example, in 2023 are more than 2 billion euros. So that is just projected costs that we have to pay by the letter of agreements that we have signed for many infrastructural projects. But what has also surprised me, that we have announcements of the new projects in the budget that I was not even aware of, that are already, you know, developed on that scale. So what I want to say is that we see new projects, even if we have in mind, and despite, you know, the global recession, we see official high-level political visits. We had a visit from the representatives of the Chinese Communist Party recently, and also there is still it is still hanging in air that there is a real possibility that Xi Jinping will visit Serbia in 2023. So with all that having in mind, I actually see this time that we are living in right now as, let's say, beginning of the new phase of relations between Serbia and China. New phase that will not include types of cooperation different than we have had over the past decades or so, but that we are exiting that COVID cooperation, COVID partnership phase, and we are now going back to the phase of economic and political cooperation on the level that is much higher than it was before COVID-19, because COVID gave that boost, you know, to China as a popular actor in Serbia. And finally, we cannot, you know, forget and not have in mind that there is a real possibility that following the third election of Xi Jinping, China will try to make that next step as the most powerful country in the world. But there is a question whether it will be, you know, coming from national level, growing nationally, dealing with national issues, which has been often referred to as a priority for the Chinese, or will there be a new step outside of the Chinese borders? And having in mind the history of the recent cooperation, Serbia has been a poster child of the Chinese presence in the Eastern Europe, in the Western Balkans, and I don't see that it will change anytime soon, and Serbia will remain, if not on the same level, then it will even upgrade the level of cooperation with the China, including all of the aspects that you have mentioned: investments, foreign exchange, etc.
Thank you, Mr. Zsolt. I know that you'll have to leave before we end, so I would like to ask you one more question before your departure. Recession is happening. It has probably just started, and we don't know what's gonna happen in the future. But how do you see it is going to affect media literacy and our vulnerability and our resilience to fake news? And what do you expect media to you know, what approach to take in the following period?
I think that definitely this issue will stay on the agenda. I mean, to build resilience against fake news and non-friendly information operations or psychological operations. And there will be several sides of this issue. What we can do, and we have started to do already, we can take legal measures against platforms or media outlets that are spreading fake news and fake information. You could see already the French legislation, in the French legislation from 2018, from the German legislation, October 2017, US legislation as well. They started already to protect their information environment against non-friendly fake information. And now it's very, be careful, because this legislation is not against the multipolarity of the information and the opinion. It is not for oppressing somebody who is not talking like I am talking. This is specifically against fake and false information. Now, most recently, there is the EU Digital Services Act that would help also to secure the platforms and the digital environment. So this is one thing that I see is developing, and now legislators are more and more aware of the need of doing something on that field. Most probably it is not enough yet. It should be fine-tuned, and there might be further legislation that might be needed. Now, on the other hand, there is also the responsibility of the individuals and the journalists, the media representatives. And again, I would say media representatives as professionals, they should really try to keep to the media ethics and multiply information which is double-checked and at least according to their best knowledge is right. Because it can happen that according to what you could do, it proved to be right, but at the end you realized it was fake. It happens. I mean, mistakes happens, but at least you should do your best. Now, I think that very much depends on the individuals, how we are reading news. If we are not too lazy to double check, or at least to be suspicious, because whenever we see some news that are specifically provoking anger or strong emotions, there's almost always you should be careful that there might be at least a part of the information which is fake. And I'm not saying that the entire information, and this is again a technique for spreading fake news, that part of the information might be truth. There might be some elements that are correct, but the total together, the context, is totally fake. What I could say that once with some of my colleagues for just a simulation game, we tried to create an artificial media environment. And we invented a story, which was totally false story, but we took real interviews of real politicians. And we cut it and we put it together. And at the end, the result was shocking for us. We created an environment when people who saw it, they started to come and they asked, it is true, and those were diplomats and politicians, and normally they knew the real situation, but even they believed, they said, oh my God, but really this politician said this or that. That was nothing else than just the real interview, so the truth. Indeed, this politician said this, but just in a totally different context, in a totally different time, and so forth. So the individual can do a lot by trying to check the source of the information, trying to check if it can be really real or not. It is obviously not very easy. Civil society institutions can also help with education and educating people and giving them some easy tool how to filter the information, if that is truth or if it is not true. Obviously, we could talk about it for hours because it is not an easy issue, but I think that more or less this is the essence of what I could say about it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for participating today. So, Andrei, I would like to address one issue. It is very big issue in Serbia right now because Serbia is on its path, or at least we believe it is, towards EU, towards NATO, or we'll see how that goes. But most population, biggest part of population is against it. And you, as your country has entered both EU and NATO, can we discuss a little bit more about that? How was the sentiment in your country while there were negotiations about joining EU and NATO, and has the sentiment changed in this period since you have joined those institutions?
So initially there was very much an enthusiastic mood, and you have to keep in mind that the discussion about joining EU and NATO started quite early after the revolution. So people were, especially in the case of NATO, people were still concerned about possible Russian reactions. It is, as I said before, a strong public opinion that distrusts and fear Russia. And it was pretty much accepted by everybody. And there was at the beginning a certain level of consensus within the political class. The Socialist Party, the so-called post-communist party, made a meeting with everybody, and including the far right at that point said, okay, notwithstanding anything else, this is what we want to do. So it became kind of like a country project. And it is and to this day, it is majority within Romania to support the European Union and NATO. Now, towards the EU specifically, there have been gradual slowing down in support due to various reasons. To some extent, we can say that expectations are always a bit high and they get cooled down. And there is also Romanian populism that from time to time tries to pin all sorts of problems on the EU.
Thank you. Igor, we spoke to fake news. We spoke about fake news with Zsolt. And my question was, how is media going to tackle it? That there is the same question for Serbia that I'm very, very interested in. So every time there start rumors about obligatory military service is going to be returned and so on. That is a clear sign that there is something else that needs to be. Other news that needs to be not so visible, because this is something that public always likes to talk about. So now that topic is active again. So is this our way of just covering stories, covering the truth about the recession and its scope that is happening right now in Serbia?
Regarding the obligatory military service, I think that the purpose of that kind of news is just, temporary to redirect attention for, I don't know, 2-3 weeks, and that's it. I mean, for covering up recession, it has to be much more systematic. At this moment, Serbia is not really yet at the recession, according to the data of the country's fiscal council. We are somewhere around 1% of growth of GDP in the third quarter, so this is not yet enough. But obviously, it is a drop from the previous heights. But obviously there will be many challenges that the government and the political elite will have to deal with. So in the upcoming period, because of the costs of borrowing are increasing. Some of our traditional markets are not accessible anymore or will not be accessible in the near future. For example, Russia. So, Russian market was not that important for Serbia, but on the other hand, I mean, there was, a particular niche of exporters that oriented towards that market, and this market will be lost, if not now, in the next 6 months. So I'm using this just as an illustration that actually there are some challenges with which the government will have to cope, and how they will deal with it. Well, I think that there is a chance for much different narratives that could actually entertain the public, and they do not have to be fake news. For example, narratives that are aimed towards polarization, redirecting. I mean, first and foremost, I mean, we have this chaotic situation regarding Kosovo right now and Serbia-Kosovo negotiations. This could be quite useful in the media sense to entertain the public, right? But then also, I mean,
do we see this question coming to an end ever in the?
Well, it depends. Actually, depends on both actors. I mean, both actually on 4 actors: on Serbia, Kosovo, on EU and the US. And it's, to solve this issue, you have to have a sort of alignment of interests that we do not have at this moment. The West would like to see this thing closed, and now especially because of the crisis, in Ukraine. But the second best option is stability. So not necessarily that we will witness closing, because if the West is not willing to invest a lot in this process, I mean, in order to close it, and from the perspectives of leaders from Belgrade and Pristina, both of them, it's also about the question of the political cost for them. But in any case, whenever there is despite this political costs and challenges, it's always useful to have a story like that, because you can redirect the attention of the public into the certain direction if needed, of course. But then there could be a lot of other things, and we discussed it previously, not on this panel, but previously. There is this notion that there could be actually in the future a switch of sides. Not really a switch of side, because Serbia is allegedly neutral, right? But then if Serbia becomes more closer to the West, and for example, if it introduces sanctions to Russia, then this could signify and start actually a polarization within the society. And then you will have a whole new level of entertainment for the public that would actually redirect attention from the domestic issues, recession, etc., etc. But also, this kind of switch could actually also motivate the West to invest more in Serbia, in political, both in political and economic sense. And this could be actually, a step forward that, with which Serbia could give an answer to the upcoming crisis. So that's it.
Thank you. Stefan, there is one term that keeps popping up somewhere, and it's corrosive capital. Could you tell us more about what that exactly means, and why is that potentially a huge problem?
I will, and we have to answer that. I just want to add one more thing regarding especially the role of media in the Kosovo issue, Kosovo resolvement. And you asked whether we see the end of it. I think that before, if we ever see the end, I think that before that we will see, the rise in the especially media reporting on it, but in a different way, because let's say hypothetically that there is some agreement reached by all 4 sides that Igor has mentioned, you will still have to sell it to the domestic public. And in order to sell it to the domestic public, you have to shift narratives drastically from the point where they are right now. I cannot even imagine the level of so-called pro-governmental media shift in reporting about Kosovo and what has to be done about Kosovo in order to sign agreement, ratify agreement, because media will play a crucial role in actually preparing the general public and mitigating or creating a resilient response to what will be, the end result of it, because there is a high percentage of chance that it will not really be favorable for the majority of the domestic public in Serbia. And to get back to the question of corrosive capital, well, basically, to put it in one sentence, it is a concept launched by the Center for International Private Enterprise, the US think tank, which looks at the influx of capital from the authoritarian countries, for example, from China to Serbia, and the consequences that it has towards the level of rule of law, environmental protection, potential for the corruption, basically the negative consequences of the influx of the capital in one country. On the other side of it, there is a constructive capital. Again, to simplify it, it is when foreign investor comes and brings positive development to the community, especially the local community where the investor is doing his business. But to go back to the corrosive capital, it is often connected in theory with the presence of the Chinese capital in countries including Serbia. And some of the main characteristics of that corrosive capital is, as I already mentioned, potential for the corruption, which is based on the lack of transparency. So both of those issues are intertwined, interconnected. We often do not know anything. It is not reported by the decision makers. It is not reported by the media. We don't know anything about negotiation process. We often see only contracts or the end results of the cooperation with the Chinese. There is a possibility that there is nothing wrong behind it, but the sole fact that we do not know leaves us with the opportunity to be concerned and to not be sure that it is a positive thing, but that we are concerned that it can be a negative thing. The second thing that we have witnessed in Serbia, it is the treatment of the labor force. Mostly the labor force that the Chinese are bringing from outside of Serbia. So not a domestic labor force, but either the Chinese workers or in the one case, Vietnamese workers. So the bad treatment of those workers, basically misconducting and not respecting the labor laws of the Republic of Serbia, which brings us to the next problem and next aspect of corrosive capital, and that is non-alignment with standards and regulative norms of the Republic of Serbia in different areas, but most notably labor rights and also environmental protection. And that will be the fourth issue, the impact to the environment, and what is actually the end result of the production process, because especially when we're talking about mines, where we have, and I'm talking for people who are not familiar with it, with the Chinese-owned bore mines that are rich with copper, but also silver and gold, which have been heavily exploited by the Chinese company Zijin, but also a steel mill in the city of Smederevo. All of those investments have left a certain negative mark on the environmental surroundings in those areas, most notably air, land, and water pollution in those areas. So that would be, the basic representation of what we see when we talk about corrosive capital and the examples of the Chinese corrosive capital in Serbia. But I have to finish with, the sentence that basically those consequences would not be able, if they are not at a certain point allowed or not received proper response by the domestic decision makers. So the bottom line question is, why is our government or why is our country silent to those issues? Why it is possible for those issues to repeat themselves, and why general public is not really informed about why that happened and what our government or our local self-governments or local communities can do in order to prevent happening in it again in the future.
Thank you. Andrei, can we talk about what are the most common sources of political fake news?
So I would say that the most powerful source are politicians themselves. There is, I believe, a marked fall in the quality of political debate. And we can see that also with the rise of the far-right party Our, who is anti-establishment, anti-system, and pretty much would say anything that needs to be said in order to achieve their purpose. If the question was geared to some extent towards foreign interference, it's not so much of that. The direct Russian interference, by which I would mean official channels, are extremely not successful, like hundreds of reactions a week. So very low for the Russian embassy, for example, and the Chinese embassy is typically even lower. There is, on the other hand, indirect influence, where we cannot typically say whether it is commanded from outside of an actual operation, or there are just people who align themselves with Russia for their political purposes. And we have a pretty robust online environment where people just repurpose political information, either the current Russian propaganda or messages that are meant to discredit any kind of effort made by the political class in support of Ukraine.
Thank you. I would have, because we are approaching the end of today's conference, so I would like to ask one question to Igor and to Stefan. And I believe it says a lot. I would like to know exactly how resilient do you think we are, especially to fake news, how media literate we are, especially having in mind, for example, that some polls in Serbia have shown that people here believe that Russia is one of the main investors, for example, in Serbia, and the most help to Serbia that comes exactly from Russia, which we know is not true, and that EU is actually the largest supporter. So having in mind that people really like to believe in that, and that media here are not doing anything to prove differently. How do you see our resilience? Do you see it like going in a better direction? And do you see it like any good right now?
Well, to be honest, I don't see that we are resilient at all, but there are two actually aspects of our resilience. First one is the resilience of in the official domestic discourse. And what I mean by that is actually the official media that are, in a catalog or in the state catalog of the media, so they are entitled to participate in a calls for applications of state-funded projects. The problem with these media is actually that they themselves are not actually adhering to the principles of good reporting. And what I mean by that is actually that, and in particular, some of the TV stations with a national frequency are quite problematic because they are also the ones who are, to an extent, spreading disinformation. So in order to become more resilient, we first need to have a change with that. So, and this is not the question of literacy of citizens, it's what is being served to them. As I said at the beginning, actually 50, I think 30 to 40, even to 50, I mean, according to the, if I recall correctly, to Nielsen, 51% of citizens of Serbia have TV as their primary source of information. So the state-owned TV stations, not state-owned, but the TV stations with the national frequency are actually the key, and the change in their reporting is the key regarding the improving of the resilience in the country. Second thing, and I think that in the long term this is way more dangerous, is about not just about media literacy, but in essence it's about the cyber literacy, because of algorithms by Facebook, by Google are actually creating balloons out of groups of people, and they are, if I'm inclining more towards, I don't know, right-wing information or extreme right-wing information, algorithms function in such a way that I'm being flooded with information coming from that area, similar information with a similar content and with a similar logic behind it, etc., etc. So basically, I don't know, on my Facebook, it's quite funny because I'm experimenting with it, and now I realize that that in the past 2 months they are bombing me exactly with 2 or 3 types of information and not more. So nothing else. And we are actually flooded on the internet with different types of information. But to me, on Facebook, in my news feed, nothing else appears. It's just these 3 categories of information. One is about sports, of course, but nevertheless, it just shows you that you can actually, despite the huge offer that you have on the internet regarding the news and whatever you can find, eventually, if you are not cyber literate, you will become quite lonely and narrow to your own ideological or preference bubble, and you will reside it. And in the end, how this can actually be translated to the factual instabilities is that you are being fed and fed if you are with the far right news, and then eventually you would be keen, for example, I don't know, to support coup d'état or something like that, or to support extreme right actions on the streets of Belgrade or elsewhere. So what we need actually, and for example, in Great Britain, in Estonia, in some other countries, you have programs like Cyber First. Cyber First, for example, in the UK is a program that educates people, students from the elementary school about the principles, how the internet functions, and what are the dangers of getting information on the internet and from internet, and how people should behave, how you should treat and use this technology in order to become to be resilient as a part of the society. And this enhances the resilience of the society itself, in the long run. I mean, in our cyber security strategy is poor. Our institutions that are governing cyber are fragile. There is no awareness among the political elite about the dangers that are there and what should be done. So in essence, in order to improve our media literacy and our media resilience, we should also actually tackle this technical aspect, how you deal with it. Because now it's quite easy. You take a smartphone, you go, you swipe right, and then all of a sudden you have a bunch of recommendations from Google of news in which you might be interested to read. It's quite easy. You don't have to go to kiosk to buy a newspaper or to switch channels. You have it in your hand. But what is the source? From where is it coming? That is the question.
Thank you. Stefan, would you like to add?
Yeah, just short, because Igor has mentioned so many, really good things. If you are, Igor, if you're afraid of Facebook and Google algorithm, let me tell you about TikTok algorithm and what it does. It's crazy. I mean, but not joking aside, but put that aside, what I would like basically to reiterate, because Igor, I think, mentioned this already, is the polarization that we see, especially in media reporting. Polarization of the mainstream media, the most popular one, because there is still decent, objective, investigative media, which unfortunately just doesn't have the outreach that it probably has. And if it even gets to the mainstream public, it doesn't have the overall influence that those pieces and research reports should have. But polarization, in a sense that someone decided that fire should be fought by fire. And if you have one-sided subjective propaganda from one side of political spectrum reporting in the mainstream media, someone decided on the other side that it will fight in the same way. So basically, if your political options are on the 2 separate spheres, part of the spheres, and you are on one side and your enemy is on the other side, basically you're using the same tools that your enemy is using. It's just you're not seeing it because you are looking at it from your own perspective. And that rising polarization will first and foremost leave us in the mainstream without the objective, general, informative programming that should be, placed in the general population, especially with the channels, with the national media, but also the newspapers as well. That's the one thing. And the second thing is that we will probably be, trapped in that never-ending bubbles that Igor have referred to, and you will be just digesting it, which lowers the possibility of the societal dialogue, which lowers the possibility of finding the common ground with the opposing side. Basically, you will be buried as an enemy of the other side, which in the long term, lowers any level of constructive approach to the social dialogue or whatever we want to achieve, with reaching out one to each other in the general policy.
Thank you, Andrei. I see that you would like to add something also, so we can wrap up.
Again, very briefly, because the famous algorithms were mentioned, we have been having discussion with both Facebook and Google, particularly because the subject is raised by the DSA, and it is interesting to see how companies adapt to that. And I would say that the attitudes of the two companies were quite different. The Meta mother company is quite visibly treating this as a PR issue. They are offering assurance, but they are trying to keep it a little vague. We are doing the best, but we cannot do everything, and particularly in smaller languages like Serbian and Romanian, it is a major problem. And I have tried repeatedly to see how many people actually work and speak these languages, and I couldn't get any number. On the other hand, Google is, in my opinion at least, being more assertive. And they have suggested at some point that they are going or trying to go at least above and beyond what is requested from the DSA. So they have their homegrown effort. Now, how much time will it take until it reaches, again, small languages like Romanian and Serbian? That's a problem, of course. But they seem more open, and if everybody of your guests has any kind of contact with Google, they could try and speak about that. It could work. There's a window opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you all once again for speaking about this topic. And I hope to see you in a year with some better outcomes than it was this time. Thank you.
Thank you.